Michael, I really appreciate you hopping on tonight, joining me for this
Yeah.
episode of the Cameron Brown Show. We're now at 49 episodes, so
Nice.
yep. So we've
I
made a
beat
little bit of
50.
yep. We're getting close. We're getting close. But we've made some progress over the past year as it relates to getting this content up and running and finally getting to this point where I feel like these conversations have become a lot more real, a lot more authentic as I've kind of settled into this too.
Mhm.
So I really appreciate you hopping on now instead of super early on. It's a little different now at this point in the
Yeah,
podcast. So,
no, absolutely.
but Michael, we actually Patricia connected us, and we are obviously now hopping on for this episode. You have a diverse background from sports to running an agency, running the Deviate Group, and so I'm going to let you kind of kick this off and give us a little bit better understanding of your journey, your background, and then we'll certainly just proceed from there.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do my best.
Okay.
Yeah, so I grew up here in Park City. And back in the 80s, skiing was everything to most people here. Not everyone, but for me, it was definitely my passion. So I pursued a career in skiing at a very young age. And took that all the way through college. Skied at a somewhat professional level. Never, my pursuit was always the Olympics. Never got there. Was surrounded by a lot that were. So it's always kind of funny. You go, "Huh, I was never good enough." But then when you really take it, you pull back and you're like, well, you were skiing with the ones that made it. So the percentages are, in hindsight, I can give myself credit that I wasn't that far off.
Right.
Um, and then from there, once I was done with my competitive career in skiing, I went to law school. I went to Pepperdine University in Malibu. Some people drive by and think it's a country club. It does look like one, but it was a great school. I wanted to get out of the snow and I wanted to surf. That was kind of the main reason. And that campus is, you could walk out onto the balcony of the law school and you could watch the waves come in and know if the surf is good or not. And if it was, I had a couple of friends that were always like, yeah, let's go surf. So that was my law school experience. But when I was done, came back to Utah right before the Olympics, and I was really committed to probably being in-house counsel. I didn't want to be in a law firm. I knew that just didn't that kind of grind didn't suit me. I interned during law school and stuff, and I just felt like working for one organization, which I had the opportunity to actually intern during law school for Fox Sports at one time as well. And I really enjoyed that. Just it was a lot more diverse. And so when I came back to Utah, I begged and pleaded my way into the Salt Lake organizing committee for the 2002 Olympic Games and got a job there in their legal department. And while there, I had athletes reach out and say, "Hey, you're a lawyer now. Can you help me with these contracts?" 2002 happened to be the first real commercialized Olympics for winter. They had been commercialized in the summer and they had been commercialized a little bit in the winter, but like 2002 was when you really saw brands come in and say, "Hey, we're also going to start sponsoring athletes."
Right.
I knew athletes in 98 that didn't even have these opportunities. And all of a sudden, 4 years later, tons of athletes had opportunities with your Kellogg's getting on Wheaties boxes and everything else. And I said, sure, let me take a look at the contracts. And as I started doing that, I was like, I knew a little bit about what it was like to be an agent. And I just said, hey, why don't you let me be your agent and actually renegotiate this for you? I think we can do a little bit better. And there's some things that stand out to me. And they were like, yeah, sure. So 2002, I started my own firm, all on my own. And it started with winter sports, and then it grew into Olympic and action sports, summer and winter. I had triathletes at the time, still quite a few skiers and a few other things here and there in between, and had built a pretty decent business to where in 2012 I was acquired by a large agency out of LA called Wasserman, who are still around. We were one of the largest agencies in the world. And it was a great opportunity. I had two young kids, a little bit more security, versus the eat what you kill type of mentality when you have your own company. So I went there, was there for almost 7 years or 6 years. 2012 was when they acquired me. And come 2018, I was like, this isn't suiting me. And it hadn't been suiting me for a while. I mean, it was a good learning experience because when you're on your own, you start on your own, you're kind of, your validation is just your own personal checks and balances.
Right.
Um, you're trying to go off gut instinct, but then also when you're on your own, you allow the thoughts and everything to come in to play and you second guess yourself. And so that gave me that experience, but I just wasn't happy. And so I took it all back. I was like, look, I'm taking it all back. I had negotiated that when I joined Wasserman, that at any given point in my career, I could go out on my own. There would be no non-compete and everything. And so that's what I did.
Right.
And lo and behold, as of now, the Deviate Group has been formed. It's a new version of what I started, when I first started. There's a few differences. I actually brought someone with me from Wasserman, who was working under me at the time. At Wasserman, he really didn't want to stay there either because I was, as far as he knew Wasserman, it was me. Even though he was part of the company, he just, I was his guy and he felt like he'd be lost. He really wanted to come. So he came with me, and then, I've created a few other, it's more independent contractors, but relationships for client services and other things. So it is a full service agency, but I outsource some of the other capabilities so I can really
Yeah.
kind of just hone in on what I love to do and want to do versus micromanaging a whole team all the time.
Yeah.
Like I said, Walker's still with me. He handles a caseload of athletes as well. And yeah, I really like it. I've been able to have a lot more strategic partnerships within the space with other agencies and stuff that I didn't get when you're at a large agency because everyone sees you as a competitor.
Right.
But when you are in this boutique world, you're more of a friend, you know,
Right.
and people actually like to work with me, I guess. So that's a good thing as well.
That's a positive.
All right, real talk. Whether I'm gearing up for a tough workout or preparing for an episode of The Cameron Brown Show, I need to be locked in. And that's where A-Bomb Energy comes in play. This stuff isn't just another energy drink. It was actually created by an Army Special Ops combat medic who wanted something better, something that actually helps you think clearer, focus longer, and retain information, not just give you a quick caffeine spike. And I can tell you, it really works. I've been drinking A-Bomb before I hit the gym, and it's like flipping a switch. My focus is on point, my energy is steady, and I don't get that crash afterward. Same when I'm recording this podcast. I need to be sharp, engaged, and A-Bomb helps me stay in the zone. Plus, it actually tastes great. So if you're looking for something that gives you a real mental and physical edge, go check them out at abombenergy.com. And when you order, just type Cameron in the notes so they know that I sent you. Trust me, you're going to feel the difference.
It is a positive.
Love that. So you just to kind of start off with the skiing portion of things too. So you started off skiing in Park City. You're born and raised in Park City, correct? You did mention that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a heck of a place to be born and raised, to say the
It's
least.
pretty cool. Yeah.
Pretty cool. We try to get out there once a year. That's kind of our go-to ski snowboard spot now. Did not get to go this past year, but going back in February, it's one of those things every single year I think about it because growing up on the East Coast, skiing, snowboarding, every single time I'd go, I'd get hurt and go out west, and at least I can fall and know I'm not gonna probably get a concussion and or break something immediately unless I fall completely wrong. But
Yeah.
I at least have a day of a few falls where I can kind of get back in the groove of things before I
Right.
get to enjoy the rest of the trip. So that's why I enjoy about skiing out west is the additional amount of snow and less ice.
Yeah. No, it's nice.
Super
It
cool.
is nice here.
So with the you kind of mentioned this on the call before we actually talked prior to hopping on the podcast, but was 2018 kind of the period? So you stepped away from Wasserman at that time. Was that also the period in which you were going through kind of a self-reflection of sorts, or is that before or after that?
It was really before,
Okay.
I think, if I really think about it, there was probably something that had, played into the self-reflection and everything else.
Yeah.
I think I'm really good as I look back in my career even. I tend to have allowed work to kind of be the forefront leader of what is about to happen in my life.
Right.
There's like it's a parallel, but like for some reason, it's easier for me to apply the things in my work life before I can apply them to myself. Um, Kind of speaks volumes of my um, need for controlling my environment,
Okay.
like being scared of the unknown, especially in my personal life, right? Like I think and for work, I mean, it was always scary, but it's almost like I've always been more willing to take the risk with external versus internal. Like even, to ski at the level I did, to do the things that I do, I'm okay taking a lot of risk.
Right.
I'm okay taking risk, even if it means injury harm to the detriment of my partner Patricia. She doesn't like that necessarily all the time. I'm trying through this healing. I'm definitely dialing it back. I still, I like to push myself, but it's different. Um, but that's because I can control physical pain, even, or you can control those things. But emotional pain, man, is that tough to really understand and control, and it's even harder to sit with, I guess, is the biggest thing for me. I don't like sitting with it.
Got it. I think this has become a recurring theme on the show is men basically being like, especially high performing men being able to sit in and talk about these things, which you've obviously done a lot of incredible things in your life and continue to be a very high performing individual. But to go from high performing skier to then high performing lawyer, now high performing agency owner as well, there's also probably a lot of stress associated with all those things. So sitting in that, but also being able to I guess, be able to talk about it too, is probably pretty difficult. But at what point were you able to kind of open up and start talking about these things? Even publicly, especially on podcasts, and to share what's maybe going on behind the scenes, especially when men don't seem to be able to do. Generally speaking, men don't seem to be able to do this very well,
I went through a period.
especially myself.
Yeah, no, for sure. I went through a period where I went through a pretty dark place in my life in 2019 where I was definitely open with the pain I was in. But I was doing traditional therapy and those things and on medications, but the medications were just increasing my anxiety. Anxiety's been the worst for me. My anxiety has nearly killed me multiple times. Depression is like, for me, it's like, okay, it's sad, it's sorrow, you have nowhere to go, you're alone, but it's almost like, but there's something calm about depression to me, whereas anxiety and anxiety's wrecked my nervous system too, it's kind of crazy, and it goes all the way back to my childhood. So, here I am on this real deep healing journey for 2 years, but I'm trying to, really reset a nervous system that's been off for nearly 50 years.
Right.
Easily by the time I was age of 5, it started to get, deregulated and you don't know how. But in the last little bit, it's been messy in the way I communicate it when I'm down, when I'm anxious. It comes out in a flurry of who knows what I'm even saying. I'm learning to be more grounded and have the right language around it. But I think for me, what really calls me to talking about it all is the fact that I didn't find a lot of people, men or women. I think it's both, to be like, hey, look, when you go through this, it could be scary, it could be messy. And I don't know, my journey was it and is it's hard. I've had to dig deep into understanding. Sometimes I'm like, gosh, I wish I wouldn't have understood. I just wish I would have figured out how to just integrate as an adult male and kind of bypass all that. But I
Right.
think, as I'm coming out of it, I had to understand why I didn't love myself. Um, and in order to do that, I really had to dig deep and find like what are the causing roots, and for me, I had a lot of guilt and shame around that, and I think the only way to get rid of those is to really find the causation of it all, to realize it wasn't your fault. I
Right.
At the age of 5, I was forced to go into a survival mode and learn how to survive versus thrive. Like there just wasn't a lot of support. There wasn't. I had a lot of physical abuse, and on top of the physical abuse always comes that you're never going to be good enough.
Right.
I had zero support, and I'm very athletic, and a high achiever in athletics. And I, even through this healing, had to go through a real low period of like, what could have I been had I had parents who believed in me, or even had parents that just showed up, that would come and watch me and cheer me on.
Right.
But I had the complete opposite. Like, what are you doing? Why are you going? Found every reason to ground me from going to anything I wanted to do, all those kind of things, you know? So it was really hard for me to believe in myself.
So you've now truly been on this healing journey of sorts for the past 2 years. But it took you till now in your life to get there. Was there, I kind of asked this earlier, but what was it that triggered you to be like, it's time for me to take this next step?
It's a couple of things, you know,
Yeah.
like I said, 2019, I went really dark and deep in a depression with a ton of anxiety. There was, you know, very large suicidal thoughts, you know. Dug my way out of that more traditionally. Realized there's just so much anger inside of me that I released, kind of dumbed down the anger. I still, you know, even recently have still have like some rage that comes out, but the day-to-day anger wasn't. I got rid of that.
Right.
But after that, you know, it's like, oh, okay, learn to love yourself. And just knowing, you know, there's not a, people can tell you that you need to love yourself before you can give love and all these things. But it's like, I didn't know what that scared the crap out of me.
Right.
I felt like if I love myself, then why would I want someone to love me? And I've been missing love in my life because I didn't have it from my mom, you know, in a partnership. And so, you know, even when I ended a relationship in 21, um, 21, I can't even remember, but it was immediately, let's go find someone else, get on the dating train and all that. And I just never felt complete. But I kept thinking that someone will make me complete. And then I had a short little stint of dating a woman that didn't end well. And it was quick. I mean, it was like, but I went all in, you know, I went all in. That's what I do. I go all in and I bring anxiousness to it and everything else. And so when I met with Trish and started, you know, something inside me allowed me to open up to her about what I was doing. She saw it in me. She saw the pain I was in. And so she really encouraged me and helped me find this, you know. So my healing and my relationship kind of started at the same time. Not sure I'd recommend that.
But if it, well, like I say, it seems like it happened pretty naturally though, which is
It
also a good
did.
thing.
It did in the beginning, but it came, you know, like it came with a lot of hard,
Right.
because again, like with all my relationships, it's either, especially in the beginning, they think, you know, they see me as who I really am, which is awesome, which is I could never see myself being this amazing human who has fought so hard to create this life and to be who I am. And deep down, I'm so authentic and all these things, but I didn't believe it. And so I would always sabotage. And even early on with Patricia, you know, she would tell people he's my unicorn. And I would do everything I could to to try to prove that that wasn't the case. You know, there was self-sabotage because I didn't believe it. And that created a lot of, that creates hard, you know, you know, and it doesn't, I mean, it doesn't even have to be in a relationship. It could be work or it could be anything else. It's like, I didn't, I just didn't know who I, you know, like I didn't believe in myself. Even though I had given myself every reason to believe in myself because I was still here and doing all these things, I never gave myself those little victories, those little wins, you know,
Right.
just going, look at what you survived as, you know, that. And so I was always chasing and chasing and not, never believing and thinking that I had to go accomplish the next in order for everyone else to be like, yeah, Michael, you're so great. And all it was inside me that didn't see it, you know?
Can you, for those that maybe didn't listen to the episode with Patricia and don't really understand the healing and and what you've kind of gone through to get to this point, Can you kind of talk through some of the things you've done to help get yourself to this point too?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, with her knowledge in the space and everything, I started using psychedelics therapeutically to help me understand. And the one thing they do, there's different forms, and you'll hear people talk about all these things. And I've done several different things, and it's not I mean, most people, and I think like in your, when we started, and you're saying like where you live, some people are like so against them because it's a drug and it's all these things, but therapeutically, it's not. I mean, look, if you're taking anti-anxiety medications or antidepressant medication, it's no different. But what the psychedelics do is they open you up therapeutically you're in a controlled space. It's not like you're going out and whatever, you sit, at least I sit with someone
Right.
who has some form of background in psychology, whether it's just their own study or whatever, but they can open your heart up, in particular the ones that I use to really, for me, it was like I felt for the first time what it would be like if I could love myself. Now, getting there is the struggle, right? But
Right.
at least once you feel it, at least you know there's something there you're working for. You kind of can understand it versus just being told, textbook style, like love yourself and everything will be great. And you're like, I don't even know what that means because when you're five, like any 5-year-old who lives in a decent household loves themselves. They just think that everything's great. That was already taken away from me. I was constantly in like survival mode of like protecting myself, trying to prove wanting love from my mom, asking for forgiveness for things that I didn't even do just so I could get a hug or a kiss or whatever. So psychedelics kind of speeds things up in your journey. Now the difference is it's like, yeah, you could just do those things and then be like, okay, and then go back to normal life and nothing's going to change.
Yeah.
You have to integrate. It's like traditional therapy, right? You have to keep going back. You have to keep working on the exercises and all those things.
Right.
And the one thing that was really hard on me too is I think I also would fall off. Like I would integrate really well over time, but then I'd stop doing certain practices. And for me, shame is such a big deal. I even beat myself up over that. Oh, you're not working hard enough anymore, Michael, like, and so that's been my biggest struggle is getting out of that cycle. Even though I'm improving, it's like still trying to get out of that cycle and know that like ultimately, I guess the only person I really need is myself.
uh, when I think about psychedelics, and I've had this conversation now with just different individuals, different backgrounds, and the when it started though, the psychedelic conversation for me started with a lot of military friends, those
Hmm.
that were dealing with terrible PTSD, those
Yeah.
that were around others that were dealing with terrible PTSD, and you were utilizing it as a form of therapy
Yeah.
to then basically get away from their and utilizing it as therapy for their PTSD. What I've obviously come to realize is it's so much more impactful and so much more widespread than just being used for those that are dealing with PTSD in the military, because there's plenty of people who experience trauma outside of the military. But that happened to be my upbringing. It happened to be my
Yeah.
experience in a military college, which is why that's kind of the first time I heard about it. But it has now taken a number of conversations for me to truly understand the impact of this therapy, and also those that do it right and do it properly with the right training. Where I think I kind of mentioned this to Patricia, we talked about this a little bit, and I also discussed it last night with my other guest. But there are some people that seem to maybe do it monthly just to do it monthly. It doesn't seem like they're doing it while also trying to fix other things in their life. They're just kind of doing it because it's like going back to like a Tony Robbins course or a program of some kind, right? Like you're going for the high of sorts, but you're not actually integrating it into your life.
Yeah.
So to that point, have you kind of found that too, right? You utilize it, but you also there's plenty of other things you need to do outside of the psychedelic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I definitely don't go to it monthly, not even the slightest, like, it's a handful of times in 2 years. And so, um, Yeah, but it is powerful. And, it's interesting. I've had this really interesting thought around it, and especially actually with veterans. I think about this with athletes too. I think athletes and veterans, when they retire, they live in the same place. Their whole life has been dedicated to one thing. And even if you're a successful athlete, you always hear about successful athletes also falling off, right?
Right.
Because their identity is taken away from them, or so they think, right? They've attached their identity to all this. It's hard to integrate into real life and everything else. So, let's use veterans. And I've started to have this conversation with several people in the space who have been helping veterans. And I said, it's interesting. I'm starting to think about this. You're helping veterans and it's awesome, and you're helping them overcome their PTSD. How much faster do you think this would have helped? How much better could they have integrated into real life if you caught them right when they came home? Right? Because they come home and the PTSD hasn't set in. And so they come home, they have all the same tools, right? Everything else, but then they have to hit the low. And so then everyone's in like, okay, let's triage, let's get them out of that depth, get them to where they're safe with their life and everything else. But if you catch them in the beginning and show them all the cool and amazing things that they have to offer that they were taught in the military and how that integrates, we could avoid that dip because they're teaching them the same thing, but they're at the dip, right? If you catch it where they're still like, "Hey, life's all right. I think I could do this." Right? I think that, I mean, I've never really explored it, but this even brings up an interesting thought in my head is like, how powerful could these things be when you catch people when they're actually doing okay? And I think the tough thing is like everyone's okay with like, okay, we can take opioids and we can do all this stuff. And I know, now people are like no to opioids, and I agree with that, except for the fact that like you need them when you heal. You break your leg and you're in a ton of pain. Like there's nothing better than like a shot of Dilaudid in the hospital just so you can go to sleep. There's a reason for them,
Right.
right? And so I find that to be the case for all of this as well. There is a real reason. And especially for me, going back and being on antidepressants and just ratcheting up my anxiety. I mean, I was getting worse and worse. I was having to have 4 therapy appointments, two, at least 2, if not 4 a week, just to get me out of bed to say, okay, I'm not gonna do anything tonight because I got an appointment to show up tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Right.
But the meds that I was on were doing absolutely, they were reversed. Now, some people, it's not everyone has that same effect, but I'm pretty sure that anyone that dropped into a therapeutic psychedelic journey will find some kind of clarity. It also can be hard. You might see things that are gonna, create a lot of pain because of what has happened to you, but you're not gonna like, I mean, none of them have ever like ramped up my anxiety, made me want to go jump off a cliff or anything. In fact, they've all been the opposite. They've all given me hope. I come out and I actually have kind of a little bit of a halo. And then the idea is how do I integrate to keep that halo? And the thing is it's not like you have that halo coming out of it and you're like, oh, I need more of those drugs. It's like, no, I just need more of this life.
Right. Has it sent you on a bit of a I'll ask this. Has it sent you on a bit of a spiritual and religious journey, or has it been more strictly spiritual?
That's a good question. I mean, so I grew up very religious in a religious background. I mean, that's something that brought Patricia and I together. We were in the same religion. Um, we've done a little due diligence to be like, wait a minute, we were in church together when we were young and we didn't even realize it. There was an age difference, but I'm pretty sure I was in Boy Scouts with her brother. Um, so I've had some definitely highs and lows with it all, and um, definitely a spiritual journey. It makes me think somewhat religiously. I explore it a little bit more. Um, I definitely have. I think if I was really to be honest, I do believe in God. You know,
Yeah.
some people just say the higher power, the universe, whatever, and I think that's great. I think that it could be anything to anyone. Um, for me, I do, and maybe that's just a pattern of my childhood of knowing that there was a God, but I believe it. But I've also my relationship around it based on religious aspects has changed. I believe that God, and it's just like in spirituality, people say, hey, the universe will provide for you if you let it. I think God is here to try to provide for you, but he wants you to earn it. He or she, you have to be an active participant, like I think that's the whole idea behind manifesting is like you can manifest. And I think the only reason why I believe in manifesting for myself is because I used to manifest everything going wrong. I didn't deserve anything. And sure enough, guess what? When things were going well, and I'd be like, oh, things are going too well, I would literally put myself in a position just energetically to be like, oh, yep, there you go. The shoe fell again. Whether it was in personal life, whether it was in work, like all of a sudden, a deal would go bad. And so I believe I was putting out that energy, and that's been a really big, difficult shift for me to believe that I deserve these things. But I have to participate. I have to prove that I'm worthy. I have to change that energy to be positive and help and show that I'm here,
Right.
showing up.
Right.
I think some people just think, okay, well, I'm spiritual or I believe in God and I'm going to manifest and I'm just going to sit back and wait, you know? And, we're all also given different circumstances and everything else. And I think, right, a long time ago, this was presented to me, and it's something I always think, right? Like you can be a great person, you can manifest all the positive things and everything else, but you also have free will, and
Right.
you have free will to make choices. And as much as you want to say you're in that space, it only takes a few left turns to take you completely out of it, even though you still,
As it relates to free will, have you ever, at any point in this process of like doing your deep spiritual and religious search of sorts, did you ever think that maybe free will wasn't a thing, didn't exist as a part of this process, or was that always free will was always existent during this process?
for me, I don't think I really ever thought about it until
Yep.
recently, but I would say I think I always thought free will it was in existence because that was just choice,
Right.
right? It, I mean, free will is choosing right versus wrong,
Right.
you know? Do I go steal from the neighbor or do I knock on their door and say, hey, I need a little help. Can you give me some milk?
Right.
It might be, I mean, just even that, right? Like, and it's even free will to walk outside and say, I need to go knock on the door and ask for milk,
Yep.
you know? So free will is all those, it's everywhere we are. It's almost kind of part of our day-to-day life is the way I look at it. Um, and then, but it's how you show up in those choices. That's really the difference. That's where the spirituality, the religious, the positive energy versus negative energy and everything else comes into play as well.
I think one of the biggest things for me has been personally getting up and taking the action, regardless of what it is. It's like if you're going through, if you're experiencing this in your life, whatever it may be, sitting on the couch and watching Netflix doesn't really help to solve the problem. Never has, never will. As
Yeah,
much as we maybe enjoy doing those things, and we should enjoy doing those things, and we should enjoy vegging, if you're actively trying to solve a problem or find a solution to something, it means it works a lot better if you just take a step in the right direction and you start taking action towards those
for
goals.
sure. For
Um,
sure.
and I think
I
that's one of
also,
the, sorry.
oh, go, no, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just as a follow up to that, I was just gonna say, whenever I've gotten to a point in my life where I'm like, okay, what's the answer? What do I do? What's the next step? If I sit there and I get in my mind and I don't actually take action and I overanalyze, which I've done in plenty of situations, obviously nothing happens. You can think, you can try to understand, you can dive deep into things, but at the end of the day, nothing truly happens until you take that first step. So as
Yeah,
simple as that maybe sounds, obviously the biggest area of improvement I've seen for myself has been actually just genuinely taking a step, reaching out to a friend, having a conversation, saying, how do I get to that next step? and then taking the action accordingly. So
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. The only thing I would say around that, because, and it was just, when you were talking about sitting there and vegging on Netflix and stuff like that, which I mean, I understand what you're saying,
yeah,
but
as much fun as
one
it
of the,
is.
well, yeah, one of the hardest things though I also had to learn though for me, even most recently, is the importance of a pause, right? Because if I don't pause sometimes, if I don't actually just take care of myself and recharge, which I haven't done in a long time. I mean, you add, like just with my nervous system alone, it's like it's already dysregulated. And then what do? I just keep grinding harder and harder, whether it's like, and for the longest time, even like, oh, I'm taking care of myself because I'm riding my bike, but I'm riding at a level to where it still kind of is, creating, a lot of energy in my nervous system. And the only thing that I thought was helping it was that I'd come home and be super tired and I could fall asleep, but I wasn't really resetting it. I wasn't allowing it to like go into a parasympathetic state. So I think sometimes it is okay if you need to take and especially for me, I really need to learn how to take that pause, even for what was next, because sometimes if I rush into it, what I think is next doesn't become the next. The more I've been able to like take that pause and sit, the next comes. But then to your point, once that hits me, yes, I have to take action. And it's so funny. I was having this conversation this morning, very work related, where he's like, okay, well, what's your plan around this new thing that you're trying to create and everything else? And I'm like, well, here's the plan. He's like, well, how baked is the plan versus this? And I'm like, and I said, look, this has hit me so hard. And I'm that type of person that if I overthink it, I can also sit here and plan, and then slowly talk myself out of it.
Right.
So I'm like, look, I'm making a plan, but I'm also acting like I'm having interviews for web designers. I'm doing this. And he's like, but you don't. And I'm like, I know it sounds a little crazy, but like I took a pause. Like this is where I learned. I took a pause, waited. This came to me. I sat with it a little longer. And then the second I started putting it out in the world, I got positive feedback. I was like, I got to run with this now because I've got the positive feedback now. And I believe in it. This was coming from my gut. I can so easily talk myself out of it if I don't start the implementation, to your point.
There is power in the pause, though, to your point. And but I think people oftentimes mistake the pause and taking action. They do like one or the other, right? But to your
Yeah.
point, if you can pause properly and take the time to understand what you're about to do while simultaneously continuing to move forward and take action, I feel like that's probably the best approach. Well, once again, I'm sure this can be argued in a million different ways. But I think that's a prime example of continuing to take action while you're thinking on the thing that you're continuing to plan for.
Yeah.
So don't stop while you're on your way. Keep moving in order to be able to think through things properly and plan accordingly.
I've,
Um,
I've, I for sure know that in my life, things would have been different if I would have taken a pause. There's
would
certain things,
do you think that was just number of different times in your life, or do you think there were major points in which you had taken a pause? It probably would have changed the trajectory.
there's a number of times and nothing like, I mean, there was one drastic time where I took a pause in my life in my marriage, and it showed, like that was probably the only time I kind of like just, but it was a different type of pause. I wasn't really trying to, I just kind of gave up. So I
Right.
guess it's not quite the best example, but everything else, like work and everything else, I just kept moving forward.
Right.
And it kind of at a hard pace, and obviously with a lot of negative energy and everything else. So I was never able to see all the potentials. I also know that like because I was going so hard, there was an opportunity. It was around in 2010. I had this idea similar to my idea now. Similar, but very different, differing times. And because I was so like, okay, I think this is a great idea. We should, and I was trying to go and I was talking, but I didn't pause long enough to really like be able to communicate it. So I allowed people to talk me out of it.
Got it.
And and so I didn't do it. And when I look back, I'm like, that's one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career, because had I figured out a way to do what I wanted to do. It was basically kind of own production, and this was before social media, just before, but I was already doing a lot of production for my athletes anyway, but I was like, if I brought that in-house and created it before social media became a thing, I would have been doing so, like it's crazy what I think I could have done, but I didn't pause to really let the idea set with me. So I was so confident that no one could knock me down.
I I'm just writing down the power of pause for myself, especially.
Yeah.
So I think I started this conversation thinking that just taking action is probably the best way to do it. And as we're going through this, I'm just realizing there's a power in pausing. But what I've always thought of as pausing is like literally just stopping and not doing anything. And I think that's definitely been incorrect. And I got to change that moving forward. It does not mean stopping altogether and becoming lazy. It just means stopping to pause and understand what's going on and then making the right decision.
Yeah.
A
And those
proper,
pauses could be, it could be day to day, it could be 5, 10 minutes.
right,
And then for bigger things, though, it could be a couple of days. And yeah, during those days, you have to continue to operate and work and everything else. But you need to use those days or whatever time frame it is. For me, this kind of percolated for like almost 2 months.
right,
So I was still working and everything, but I was also, even with my current work, I decided I'm not going to push as hard in the direction I've been pushing, because if this really comes to fruition, I've got to make room and space and time for this thing. So you've got to pull back, I think, a little bit to give yourself the ability to implement. And then if this thing that once I paused was really like, okay, this was dumb, whatever, I can still go, I can go right back into this.
right,
But if you're driving so hard and trying to figure this out, there will never be space for this next thing.
right. It's kind of like, well, it sounds like too, like working on the business versus working in the business as well.
Yeah.
Working on
Yeah,
that next thing, working on the growth
exactly.
aspect of the business. Yeah, I hear that all the time too. And I've found that to be the case a lot as of late with one of my latest business ventures where I found myself working in the business a lot more, which is totally fine and totally necessary for building respect and just understanding the business. But the things that we talked about doing early on, we have not pushed towards them near as quickly as I'd like to because I've been working and consumed by what's in the business as well.
Yeah.
So big learning experience in that regard.
Good.
As it relates to business too, the Deviate Group and your agency. Uh, what I saw a couple different big name athletes on your website, Shaun White being one of them.
Yeah.
Can we talk about some of the athletes that you've worked with in the past and are currently working with, and some of the fun projects you've had the opportunity to work on with the
Yeah,
organization?
absolutely. I mean, over the course of the years, I've had some really fun and cool opportunities. I mean, the early days in the early 2000s when action sports was really blossoming and before social media and stuff, we did some really fun and unique things, the sponsorships, the projects. Um, I had an athlete that was on Red Bull, and he was just a phenomenal at his craft. He was a skier. And there was a snowboarder had created the world record in a quarter pipe. And then there was a quarter pipe event, and Simon started hitting it, and he was getting really close. And people at the event were like, "Oh my gosh, we might have a record. We got it!" Like, lo and behold, though, it wasn't the right quarter pipe. It was actually a pretty bad um, made quarter pipe, and he hurt himself pretty good, dislocated his shoulder, knocked himself out, and everything. But he came to me, he's like, okay, these things scare the crap out of me. So I want to beat it. Let's go make this world record. So I went to Red Bull, and Red Bull's like, okay, this sounds really cool. And we built this thing in his hometown of Sunday River, Maine, and he broke the world record. And just to put something of this magnitude, I mean, to get everyone together, to get the build done, to get all the filmers there, get the resort on board, all those kind of things, to do a project like that for one person, Normally it's like, okay, you build this thing and it's an event, there's a competition and all those things, but this was for one guy to do something. And it almost didn't happen because the weather and all these other things, it did happen. And I think that was 2007, 2008, and that record still stands today.
So cool.
So there's things like that that have been really fun. There's been all sorts of different things, some movie projects I've, been executive producer on. Um, uh, and just, I don't know, just witnessing the growth of the sport. I was a founder of what was called the Association Skier, AFP, Association of Free Skiing Professionals.
Okay.
And we basically got free skiers into the Olympics. We created a judging criteria. So the judges at the Olympics, when you watch half pipe and slopestyle skiing, those judges are using our criteria that we had created. I didn't create the criteria. We had experts that did it, but like the organization that I founded, we did all that. It doesn't exist anymore. But so there's some really, and just even those things, it's like, wow, Michael, you've done some pretty cool things. But I wanted, like for me, it didn't feel real because I wanted accolades around it, going back to my healing. And now I can look back and be like, you did some really cool stuff for a lot of people because there was a lot of athletes that, it would have been a struggle, things would have been different had we not done that.
Right.
And I've also had some really hard stuff happen. But they've been such amazing learning experiences. And some things where now that I look back, I'm like, wow, real Michael was showing up in ways that I didn't even know that real Michael existed, and one of them was unfortunately in 2012, right when I was being acquired by Wasserman, I had an athlete pass away. And I happened to be I was in the room when it happened. I mean, it happened here in Park City. She had been, we were in the hospital she passed about 2 weeks after the actual incident. There were surgeries and then life support and just nothing ever was coming around. Somehow in the chaos, I knew how to show up for the family and for everyone else and kept everything going. And so I actually, we knew that it was, we're getting close to we were almost at 2 weeks, and I was also in this acquisition happening.
Right.
And so the family said, hey, look, we've got some other people flying in. We know this is on your mind too, Michael. Why don't you go to California and take care of that and then come back? They said, we're not going to do anything until you come back or whatever. And I said, okay. What was really interesting is so I left the next day, flew to California, and I hit the ground, and immediately within hours I was getting phone calls like, we don't know what to do. I'm like, well, what's going on? Nothing. We just it doesn't feel right. Like, we need you back. And so it took me a long time to understand that the power that I had in leading this family through this.
Right.
And so sure enough, I rushed back. The plane got delayed and all these things. I was supposed to land at like 7 p.m. I didn't land till 10. I got to the hospital straight away at 11. And there's just all of a sudden I walk in and everyone's like, oh, people gave me a hug and stuff. And then a lot of people had gone home. There was probably like, I don't know, 6 to 9 people in the room or something like that. And about after 2 minutes of me being in the room, she passed on her own naturally without us the family having to actually say, okay, now's the time.
Wow.
So
that in and of itself is a life-changing event for anybody, but also seems like it was one of those moments where you were able to realize how powerful and special you are as a human being too.
I can now. At the time, I wish I could.
Okay.
Like I've always known that, like, wow, I did something extraordinary.
Right.
But I saw that as me, like, just rising to one occasion and being done,
Right.
like, this is who I am. And that was just a one-off. Now I look back because I've also had this really hard thing about like, I'm not a leader, I'm not a leader. And so even there, and so for me to even tell this story and say I could see the power I have in leading, it's really come to me that I am a leader. I just view in my line of work in particular, leaders are boisterous, athletes are, like it's just different. And so I always was like, look, I'm not a, I don't want to be a big personality. I don't want to, but I've realized like, wow, I'm actually a really powerful leader by my actions and by my humbleness when it all aligns. Like that's what I'm working on is making, like, and I can feel it coming, it's aligning now. And I really feel my confidence kind of starting to soar, but not, but it, and the more it soars, the more humble I'm getting in who I am. Like I don't have to try to tell people who I am or anything like that. In fact, some people, and I've always kind of like when I'm in my real comfort zone, I actually don't really do things. And then all of a sudden someone will say something and I've had people like look at me and they're like, I've known you this whole time and you're a lawyer. Like, it's like funny. And I'm like, they're like, you don't talk much about yourself, like,
Yeah. Well, I think
and I think,
that's the greatest part about this podcast today too. Has been this has been nothing about you being a lawyer. This has been everything about your experience, and I appreciate that more than you know because we could
thank
probably
you.
go down that road and talk about things you've done on the legal side of things for hours.
Yeah,
But better understanding you as a human being and as a high performer and what's going through your mind and how you've experienced life and what you've gone through is so much more important to those that are listening, especially to this episode. I think people would be very interested to hear a lot about the athletes you represented, and also working with Red Bull and the executive producing and all of that. And at some point, we definitely need to do an episode strictly on that portion of things because I feel like that is a 3 to 4 hour long episode that we might have to do in Park City when I'm there next, which would be
that'd
awesome.
be great.
That
I
would
would
be
love
so
that.
cool.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate diving into and focusing on what's going on in your mind, what your experiences have been like, what you're actually feeling, and just mainly because men specifically struggle to do this. They struggle to open up. They struggle to talk about it. And I feel like we'd be so much better off if we started having these conversations. Not that everybody has to do it publicly, but ultimately because it is so helpful for other men to see people that they look up to talking about it to then help them through what they're dealing with currently
Yeah.
as well.
No, I would agree. And it's definitely, and it's scary for men, you don't know how, if you're in a relationship, how they're going to react as you start to stumble. Because if you start to go through this process, I think you're going to stumble. Like you're trying to, like you become softer and all these things. And I definitely had, like I stumbled into my femininity. I'm trying to find my masculinity. You hear all those words and
Yeah,
everything else. And it's like, and I think, the more I think about it, it's like, I even get caught up in all that. And it's like, what does it really mean? And I'm kind of like, wow, for me, I just need to be true to myself. Like whether, if I'm true to myself, I know I'm going to show up in the way that I'm supposed to,
right,
but it's hard. You have to be in the right environment too, and,
right.
and if your environment isn't safe or just isn't right, it makes it difficult, and I think that but I think you can also like people can work on their environment together to create that right space if they're willing, you know but I think you have to put in work and you have to look for external sources and other things to help you find the way to reshape your environment of what from what it was to what it can be,
Right.
and that in between really can make things rough, but it's also then on the flip side, I believe that it's more powerful and greater than anyone will ever imagine. But
Absolutely.
you need more than, I don't know. Yes, you can do it all on your own and you can go figure it all out and everything else, but I also think the right environment and creating the right environment and everyone being in that wherever you're at, if you can have the right people around you that want to also help and support and everything else makes a huge difference.
So this, as of the past about 5 or so episodes, I've updated my slogan to just simply stay curious, so that people will hopefully stay curious about life, stay curious about truly everything. Keep asking questions, keep diving deeper, keep digging into things that they're interested in, and truly staying curious. So for those that are maybe curious about what it's like to go through this kind of healing, that are in this gray area and maybe in a situation that you were in, they're trying to figure out their next step. What do you think their next step should be for those? I'd say specifically not men and women, but specifically men who are high achievers, have always been hard on themselves, maybe experience some form of, I'll use the little T, big T that Patricia mentioned before, but trauma in the past, and they maybe haven't gotten over it. What do you think their next step should be as they're trying to get past their stubbornness and start to truly open up and start this healing journey?
That's a tough one. I think it's different for everyone. I'm not, I would never sit here and say everyone should be on psychedelics or try it once or anything else. Like you have to be open to it in order for it to even help. Right. And I think, if we can have legislation, if legally it becomes more open and honest, then I think people will be more open to it and see it as a therapeutic mechanism, not as a drug of, back in the, Haight Ashbury days and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you're catching me on a day too where it's interesting. I'm definitely fairly, I guess, and this term comes to me, especially today, where I'm pretty raw, you know? Um, when you're really stubborn and everything, you have like this protective coat. And so I think the only way you can really find yourself is you have to be able to take that off and be willing to get a little bit raw and almost kind of like I'd like to say sometimes you'll end up with a little road rash on the inside of you too as you go through it because it just isn't it's not all easy. But some of that road rash was already there. So the idea is to go heal it. But in order, an analogy is like, you fall on a bike or you're running and you fall and you know what road rash is and you get gravel in your cuts and everything else. So the only way to heal that is you got to go scrub it. You got to get all that stuff out for it to heal clean and be back to better than it ever was. And so I think that's what it is. So we all have scars, we all have road rash, but you have to kind of go in there and really clean it up. And that means you have to kind of like you have to let down your guard. And for the hardest thing for me was letting down my ego. And then once I started letting it down, being ashamed that I had an ego, but again, like gosh, I can't preach this more too. Like we really need to learn and teach kids at a young age not to be ashamed, right? Like that it's just man, that's like the biggest burden in the world. And as I went through this, I was so ashamed of myself for having this ego and everything, just to come to find out that without it, I wouldn't have survived. So
Well,
I don't know.
Michael,
I don't know if that answered your
yeah,
question or
no, it certainly does. I just once again to your point, I appreciate you being so raw and open on this episode specifically and talking through these things so openly. Once again, very hard to find people that are able to do it and willing to do it in the first place, which
yeah,
can also make it very difficult to find and connect with the right people. But this is exactly what I'm looking for, and
yeah,
I think in kind of my search and my personal um, tour of curiosity and being generally curious about everything. I think this is what I'm truly looking for: people to be truly open about their experiences. So that is something that's very important to me, and I really appreciate it. And it kind of as a closing note for this particular episode, I just want to give you the opportunity to maybe share anything that we didn't hit on, or maybe to expand upon something that we did discuss that you think would be very important for people to just dive deeper into as they're on this journey or truly trying to better understand themselves.
gosh, that's a pretty large open-ended question for me, and I could probably dive into a bunch of different
Yeah.
scenarios, but
This might be the power of pause and taking a moment to yeah,
Yeah, no,
I
I mean, there's a lot of
yeah,
things that I think about, but I would say, and the hardest one, and my words won't even do it justice, but you have to give forgiveness to yourself. You have to be kind to yourself. And what that means is like, for me, I think people have to like, when you hear that, it's like, no, you have to be overly kind and overly generous to yourself. Like, go reward yourself for being here. Especially I think men, we're so in the thick of it to try to provide or do whatever, and all those things. And so it's like, take yourself for a walk or go to bed early or whatever you want, like, and do things without guilt. You're taking a half a day off because you feel good about what you just did. Take that day off and don't feel guilty about it. In fact, be proud about it. And like, tell yourself, look yourself in the mirror and say, I am proud that I'm doing this. Because if you don't say it out loud, you're going to find a way to shame yourself. So it's something that I've really come to learn. Wish I would have known that a long time ago. It probably would have had me a lot farther on this, or at least believing in myself more and taking care of myself, because it's the little victories. It's like everything else. It's the little details that get you to the big wins. And so
absolutely.
you have to give yourself credit, and really give yourself credit.
Well, Michael, I think this is going to help a lot of individuals that are going through some tough experiences, and so I really appreciate that, and hopefully this will reach those individuals at a time when they are in need, and ideally they'll listen to it and truly understand your experience and learn from your experiences. Um, Not that they need to take psychedelics necessarily, but
No,
to
definitely not.
start
And,
figuring out the healing process for themselves.
100%. And I don't think it necessarily has to be. And the only other thing I would say is like, I'm a firm believer now that you need community. And as guys, I still do it. When I hit my lows, I feel like I don't have a friend in the world. That's where we go. And so I don't, when this goes up and if people reach out to you, I just want people that listen to this or whatever, or know you. I'm here. I mean, I'd be more than happy if someone reached out to you and needed something, share my info, whatever it is, because it sucks feeling lonely. It does.
Well, I think once again, I just really appreciate it, and appreciate the openness, appreciate you being raw and authentic, and allowing me to ask hard questions too, and
Of
being so
course.
willing to respond to them. So,
No, I loved it. I really did. Thank you so much, Cameron.
so as mentioned, the next episode we certainly need to do in Park City,
Great.
and I'm pumped for that. But Michael, thanks again for your time. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up, and really look forward to sharing this episode with our
I
followers.
can't wait.